Welcome, Juliana Coles. I am so excited to have this conversation with you and catch up. Juliana was one of the artists in my book, Creative Awakenings, and I have to say that Juliana's contribution was one of my favorites. Well, your artwork is so heartfelt and so in alignment, I think, with the work that I do in the world, that we really both do in the world, which for myself, I would say is the healing power of creativity. You know, I think we first met at one of Tisha Moore's art fests.
Okay.
And I do believe that's how I first met you. I was there, I think, with a booth. And at the time, I had my rubber stamp company, Storybook Designs. And
wow.
Yeah. And I believe I took one of the classes that you offered, and that's how we met. And I remember feeling like, whoa, this person is a serious sister kindred spirit. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you started down the path of this work?
The big question. Sheri, thanks for asking it. And I do want to just say that, creating authentic art, and I'm not even sure what I mean by that, because I'm not saying that, people who make nice or pretty art are not being authentic. But I think that for me, authenticity is about really reaching in and bringing to light all those uncomfortable, dark, scary places for healing, so that they're not so dark and scary anymore when we can look at them. And I think that, a lot of people would prefer not to go there and not to know about those things. And I would say for me as an artist, for some reason, there never was any other choice. So when I finally made it to art, from the get-go, was sort of pouring out my heart. And I don't know if that was at the time just, struggling with depression and not fitting in, of course, as an artist, but feeling like, oh, everybody else gets it and everybody else feels good, and I don't get what this life is supposed to be about. And I had a teacher who I think just noticed and gave me a book called The Wounded Woman.
Oh, I love Linda Shears Leonard.
I don't even think I have that book anymore. I should read that again.
Oh, that book is a classic, and it's incredible. And she also wrote a book called Creativity and the Fire of Addiction. And I still have that book.
Wow.
Which is like a classic. Yes.
This instructor gave to me, he was a pretty unique and amazing man. Also as an instructor, to be sensitive, to me, and to just give it to me, rather than just say, oh, you should look into this book. It's like, he just gave it to me. And it really changed a lot for me. And I think kind of based on that and getting interested in, I don't know, more self-expression and storytelling, and trying to bring up these inner stories to tell them. And they were not so pretty, and they were not so nice, and they were not so fine. But I think at least in art school, it was like, oh, Juliana, she's so, oh, she's so this, And I wasn't trying to be that way. I wasn't trying to be like some dark art student, but it was just kind of the nature of the work that I was doing. And at that time, we had to keep a sketchbook. And so I had a sketchbook, and I'd also always kept a writing journal. I had been writing since I was 14, so it was very natural to me, this self-dialogue, talking to myself. I'm listening to myself. So that one day with my sketchbook, wanting to take some notes, not having my writing journal, and I started to make those notes around some of my sketches and drawings, and really had this sense of I'm onto something.
Like, oh, I love it.
Finding this visual with the verbal, like it's activating something in me that wasn't present when I was just writing, even though that was really powerful, or when I was just making imagery, even though that was potent too. But the two of them together was really extraordinary. And I was, other kids, my, contemporaries, my peers were always asking, like, well, what are you doing there? Like, well, this is my sketch, just like your sketch. But they're like, no. And this is back in the late 80s. So at the time, kind of a mixed media experimental sketchbook was not very common. Like there were people doing that kind of work. They didn't see it on the internet. They didn't see it in a photograph. They didn't see it in a book. They just were spontaneously working that way. And like I said, just like a handful of people kind of around the world, like Peter Beard was one of them, Dan Eldon.
Yes,
I would say
Dan
Tisha
Eldon.
And Tracy were kind of early mixed media sketchbook artists. And so people were always asking me, well, like, how did you do that? And I started that self-inquiry of like, well, what am I doing that's different? And I tried to write about what that might be. And I also became interested, from this one book to many, into art therapy. And so while I was at art school in San Francisco, I was trying to volunteer for various art therapy programs to see if it might be, something for me. But what was interesting to me is that what I was doing in my books, they weren't doing. And they didn't know anything about. And so these program directors were saying to me, well, like, how did you do that?
Right.
So I happened to contact, I'm epileptic, and I happened to contact the Epilepsy Society or the Epilepsy Foundation of San Francisco and asked if I could volunteer for their, like artist therapy program for confidence building for epileptics. And they were like, well, we don't have a program like that. Do you want to create one? And I was like, who, me? Right? But so I did. I designed a program, and when I went to teach it, not one person showed up. And the director was really awesome, was like, it's going to take a year for anyone to sign up, so don't be worried, don't be sad. It's like it just takes a while. And then I moved fairly shortly after that. So then it took some years for me to actually get going with the teaching, but that, I would say that was it, and sort of where my teaching and my art are sort of one.
Mm-hmm.
And my philosophy around both of those about just that raw self-expression, that's true in my drawings, it's true in my paintings, it's true in I call them visual journals now instead of sketchbooks. I mean, I also have a separate kind of sketchbook practice that's a little bit different. But everything I do always combines those words with images. So I'm to want to look at a painting on the wall and feel something, or be moved, or say, I feel like that too, and I want to remember that.
Yeah.
I do feel like, I'm not the popular artist, and I'm not the popular teacher.
I think you bring up something really poignant for me, Juliana, which is, I've always said, if I had to make a living selling art, which I tried for 3 years, I did commercial art and T-shirts, and I just was like, yeah, this is not it. And I have a deep, deep need to move the energy that's inside of me and to source the energy that's inside of me and to understand the living world that is inside of me. And whether it's because I've suffered through depression and addiction and, every other whatever label you could possibly imagine over the course of my life, I didn't have a language for what I felt from my trauma.
Right.
Like I could not people say, well, what do you feel? Well, give me that happy, sad, glad chart, and maybe I can tell you, but other than that, I can't. And when I found the images and the words and didn't think about the idea of selling this piece is going to hang on someone's wall or in a gallery, there was such a liberation around allowing the true, deep inner well and the source of my own expression to come forward. And also, and this is something that I do share with my students and my clients, is that, we've all had our written journal. Unfortunately, many of us have had them read. And so what I love about this process, in my own experience, often I'll write underneath and then we paint over. And then what comes from that is all the imagery. And then what I share with my clients and my students is idea of projection, so that I share my journals with anybody who wants to look at them, because I believe that whatever they are experiencing or feeling as they look at my work, it's their own feeling. It's not necessarily even what I felt when I created it. They're having their own experience of engagement with my work. And like you, most of my work I would call shadow work. And it's a way I have stayed sober for over 30 years. It's a way I've dealt with keeping my own mental health in check.
I don't want anybody to walk by my piece and think, oh, that's so nice. I want to stop people in their tracks. I need more from, the imagery that I see on Instagram. This world is so different than kind of where you and I came in. We weren't bombarded by so much information. There's so much coming at anyone. How would you ever try to make your own or not try to make it look like that thing you think looks really good? I just don't think we were affected by that.
And I think in a lot of ways we were blessed in that way. And honestly, I didn't find out about Peter Beard or Dan Eldon, I don't know, until way into the process. And I keep a copy of Dan's book at the recovery center where I contract one day a week because, and you understand this, so many people feel like when they come to the blank page, they have to make a gallery quality something. And, for me, there's nothing wrong with that. That's amazing. I think it's wonderful that there are people in the world who do that. And then there's people in the world that do the other, that can support people in using creative process for healing or deep introspection. And there's a place for everything, right? And when I think about Dan Eldon, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes, his parents were missionaries and took him to Africa. And, this was in the 80s, I think. And he was young and he was a photographer, converted a bus into a photo studio and went around Africa and created these incredible, raw, beautiful journal pages of expression of his experience. And unfortunately, he was murdered being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he really, like Peter Beard, left a legacy of authenticity. And the craziest thing was when my book went out of print by the publisher, by Northlight Books, I was in a terrible time in my life, going through a divorce. They were like, oh, your books are going to be a remainder. Do you want to buy the rest? It had been a really good run. It was 2009 to 13. And I was like, I can't deal with this. And I just let the books go. And in 2015, after my divorce, I moved to California and was living and working on this ranch. This woman who was the ranch owner never treated me like the barn girl, She's like, hey, I think there's somebody here that you need to meet. It was New Year's Day, Juliana. So I went over for New Year's breakfast, And sitting in her kitchen was a woman and a man who literally were the editors on Julia Cameron's Artist Waybook.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And when I sent my book off to the publisher for, to see if they would want it, I literally kissed it, put it in the FedEx thing and said, may this be as long-lasting as The Artist's Way. I am not kidding. And so
wow.
here was these people sitting in Lisa's kitchen, and Lisa goes off and says, Sheri has this book. So Susan says to me, well, what's happening with your book? And I was like, well, it went out of print. I was in a really bad time going through a terrible divorce, and I just couldn't. She goes, oh, that's what we're doing now. We're helping authors self-publish. And I was like, what? And that was it. That woman, like, if she had to do it again today, I don't even think she could on Amazon, but she literally brought my book back to life for me. And now I own the rights and no one can take it away. And now it's become a workbook for my teaching program and a training book for my students. And miracles happen, right? And that was kind of the whole point of the book at the time was, setting an intention and letting it go. And Susan, she's like, to me, one of those angels. Yeah. So when I think back to your piece, your title for that was Radiating Joy. The process that you went through, in my mind, was really powerful because some of the listeners may not know, but each artist took the Envision process for a month. You started with lighting a candle. I have so many questions, but which is the quote unquote real one? And you wrote, the one at the heart of the matter buried beneath others, ? I close my eyes and ask internally, what is at my core? Fear, neglect, betrayal, pain, grief, ... lots of stuff. No big news, not deep enough. Eyes still closed, a voice inside says, quote, you let me down. When I choose someone who proves they are unworthy yet maintains my attention, I let myself down. Intention for the month is to be aware of the ways in which I let my poor baby down by allowing her to suffer. Good, but that seems like an awful lot. That was how you started. And then you did a beautiful job. Like each day you journaled. It was amazing. And I don't want to give away what your the October 31st was, but I'm reading it right now and I have shivers. I'm going to read it out, just one line right now.
Okay.
It is safe to create a body of work. My art matters. It is safe for my art to matter. It is safe for me to create art that matters. My voice matters.
It's really interesting for me to be sitting here listening to you say things that I wrote, because I have to say it's been a rough few weeks and that I feel like, these are old feelings.
When you're a self-employed artist, you're always scrapping.
Yeah. And I think, every stage is like a new transition. I do feel like, again, we were all much younger when we did that. Sort of authenticity of, that natural voice through, some sort of intentional creative project, kind of into that unknown.
Yeah. I'm just sending you a ton of love and gratitude for your honest and really beautiful share.
Well, thank you, Sheri, and thanks for, wanting to bring. I do feel really grateful for, this conversation today, and not 3 days ago. And that the recollection of working on that book, like I said, I'm gonna look at that again. I think it's just really interesting, what you said about it, and to kind of be there, and that, where is a manual like that for women our age?
Right. You said in the beginning of our conversation that you were committed to raw self-expression, and that's how you started. And I believe that this conversation we just had together was absolutely a mirror of the truth of who you are and who you are in the world. And I am so grateful for your authenticity and vulnerability.
I'm gonna say that's because of you, right? So if I were having this conversation with someone else, I might not be able to be free to be that. So I'm also grateful because I feel like, well, I get to be me in the world with you. Because I can't do that with everybody. It's not okay with everybody. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love you. Have a great night.
Okay, I love you too, sweetheart. Thank you so much for today.
Okay, bye, love.